All of this stimulation is affecting us. Technology is rapidly moving forward. There are all these new tools. We're being inundated with things. So it's really grabbing our attention, which may be our most valuable currency. And sometimes it's hard not to pay attention to it because it's everywhere and it relates to work, professional environment. And I say for entrepreneurs, mental health is more important than revenue. Mental health is more important than how much money you've raised. That's your foundation on which you're building everything. It's yourself. So we teach people how to use neuroplasticity to intentionally change our brains, to get rid of depression, to get rid of anxiety, to get rid of PTSD. It takes work, it takes time and energy and effort. We have technology that facilitates that process. And that's connected to my own personal mission, greater empowerment of individuals to understand they don't need these other things for their mental health. They can actually change their own brains.
This is the Human Future Podcast, where we explore the intersection of technology and spirituality with some of the world's brightest minds. Together, we paint a vision of the desirable future and discuss the actionable steps to make that vision a reality. And now, without further ado, let's begin. Today, our guest is Chad Olin, who is an entrepreneur with a background in business and focus on mental health and travel. He is the co-founder and chief executive officer of Supermind, a company with a mission to alleviate mental suffering for millions of people. During our conversation, we explored the intersection of entrepreneurship, personal development, and mental health. Drawing from Chad's own experiences, he shared the challenges entrepreneurs face, the importance of mental health, consciousness, and the potential solution technology can provide. Chad further delves into inner workings of Supermind, exploring how the platform uses real-time biofeedback and mindfulness techniques to facilitate mental health improvements. Super interesting and engaging conversation. I hope you enjoy it. Welcome. Thank you for being here. It's an honor to have you in the space. We've talked about recording this conversation at Kareem's, I think, for the first time we mentioned about it. And now we're here.
Now we're here. Thank you for having me, Kirill. It's a real pleasure. I love what you've done with the studio. Yeah. It's not our first time talking in this format, so super excited to get into the conversation.
Yeah, exactly. You know, I think a good place for us to start is by you maybe briefly sharing a little bit about your journey of how you got here. And by here, I mean, you know, running Supermind and the things that you're involved in. A few instrumental kind of turning points that brought you here for the reference, and I will branch off to the topics that are relevant to the conversation.
For sure. And there's lots to talk about. So I'll maybe encapsulate it with 2 or 3 key moments. It really started with a backpacking trip to Southeast Asia that I did right before going to business school. And I went by myself for 4 months, starting in Thailand. I had no plan. It was an amazing experience. And 2 things happened on that trip. The first thing was I went on a 10-day silent meditation retreat in Nepal called a Vipassana retreat. It was life-changing on many levels. I felt this really deep connection to oneness and some other things we can get into. The second thing that happened on that trip was I had these really incredible travel experiences in faraway places that inspired me to want to start a travel company. And so I did that after graduating from business school. And about a year into it, I started to experience really severe anxiety and stress, sleep issues, burnout. And that led me to meeting the creator of Supermind, which is a new mental health therapy. And he helped me really significantly with those issues at that time in my life. And I was inspired to partner with him to create a company that would make it a lot more accessible for the world.
Amazing. Yeah. So definitely before we touch on, and just have a discussion about the company, what you guys do, I'd like to dive deeper into the entrepreneurial journey. It sounds like the anxiety and sleep issues were related to stress that was related to potentially running a company that maybe wasn't going as what you expected, maybe some unpredictable circumstances that led you there. So maybe talk a little bit more about that.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's been quite a journey, I will say, over the last now 7.5 years. So the root of the stress and anxiety was, as you described, that there were things that were not going as expected. There were challenges. I think many entrepreneurs go through this on some level. In my case, I think it was magnified by the nature of the business. I was running a tour company in Cuba, which was very nascent. We were working only with the private sector entrepreneurs, which didn't really exist at the time. And there was no network for us to plug into. So we're building everything from scratch with no internet and no banking system.
Yeah.
And then there were government changes, geopolitical issues. So that kind of magnified what I think all entrepreneurs go through at a very deep level, which is this sense of placing so much of your own self-worth into the success of the business. And if the business is not doing well, then that's a reflection of your own self-esteem. Yeah. And that can lend itself to getting into these really chronic states of hypervigilance, do or die moments stacked repeatedly for years.
Yeah.
And that can lead to damaging effects on our mental health and wellness. So it's been quite a journey going through those challenging moments and seeing that it really has forced me to create my own really strong mental health foundation, almost just to survive. Yeah. So it's like the gauntlet, the entrepreneurial gauntlet, if you will. I'm happy to touch on any of the specific challenges associated with that business if you think it's a good use of time or...
Yeah, I think it's more so about a challenge of being an entrepreneur and dealing with, as you mentioned, unpredictable circumstances. Whatever could be useful, let's say a young entrepreneur who's just starting out, maybe hasn't really gone through all of the different cycles that entrepreneurs might be going through, giving them some kind of heads up, like this might be coming. You like just kind of be ready for moments where you potentially need to eat glass or something like that. You know what I mean? Because entrepreneurial journey might be very unpleasant, and as an entrepreneur myself, there's this drive inside that's sometimes irrational. It just tells you that's your path, that's where you need to pursue, and you just go in there no matter what. And that no matter what might be somewhat challenging. Yeah.
So the first thing I would say is do it for passion and not for money. And inevitably things will likely get very challenging. So you can anticipate that it will be painful at times. And I think that's a good word just to frame the experience, that it is painful. And the reason why we undergo that painful experience is because we're very passionate about what we're building. If you're just doing it for the money, it's kind of hard to justify that type of pain sometimes, right?
Right. And
ultimately, I think success comes down to resilience. You just got to keep going. So when those painful moments arrive, it's hard to find the resilience if it's just about a cool idea or making money. You need to have that like really strong passion that drives you forward in those times. Yeah. And just as an example, the Cuba company is actually doing really well right now, which is amazing. I started it 7 years ago, 7.5 years ago, and I'm not involved in the company anymore. But to see it go through these devastating cycles of geopolitical issues and then COVID, which completely destroyed the entire travel industry. For sure. It took an extra year to recover in that country, and now to see it flourishing is just such a clear example and a lesson for me in any future entrepreneurial endeavors that all you got to do is just keep moving forward. And there may be a question as to, is this the best use of my time? Yeah. So I don't want to tell people to just pour their time and energy into something forever. Maybe they'll change their mind about the impact they want to make. But it certainly is a really powerful experience there. Two other things come to mind. One is just around really prioritizing your mental health and your mental wellness, your well-being, your self-care, right? And I say for entrepreneurs, mental health is more important than revenue. Yeah. Mental health is more important than how much money you've raised. It's primary to everything. That's your foundation on which you're building everything. It's yourself. So if you're not creating that strong foundation for yourself, it may not be sustainable. And to stay in that state of resilience and to be sustainable over the long run, to go through those painful experiences, requires you to prioritize yourself, your self-care, your mental health. And then there's a part of that, burnout is very real. And it can sneak up on you. It snuck up on me so many times where there's a part of me that's like, hey, I've got to work all night. I've got to work all weekend for some reason. And I may not even question that feeling that I have. It's just like, go, 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 go. It's part of that hypervigilance a little bit. It's part of that chronic state, right? The do or die. I got to just keep going.
Yeah.
And I will share that there have been many times where I've run into a wall and it feels like I can't really think clearly and my energy's off and I'm not optimistic as I normally am. I'm not positive like I normally am, which was very weird to me. And it's very jarring. And I'm like, what is this? Shit, I'm burned out. Yeah. Okay, now what do I do? Well, it doesn't take that long to recover because I have all these great practices. So it could just be a day or a couple of days or even just an afternoon.
Yes.
But the point that I'd love to make is that rest can be productive. Slow down to speed up. It is a real thing. And there have been so many instances where I'm like just banging my head against the wall trying to knock off the task. And then I take a step back. I'm like, that just took me way longer than it needed to. If I was refreshed and I was doing proper time blocking and strategic allocation of my most precious resource, which is my attention and my time, and not just going all in as my guiding principle of how I'm managing my time. So there's one other point. I'm kind of jumping to another thing here, but that as entrepreneurs, we often think we can do the impossible, which is incredible, but it can be a gift and a curse. Right. So if we're reaching for more than we can grasp, we may take on too much. And that's been a key lesson for me recently, is that I feel I was trying to do too much, and then I was guiding my time and my energy investment based on just going all in 150%, and then I was burning out. And stuff wasn't moving forward. So just by reorienting my sights a little bit lower and saying, okay, let me just start here. This is easier. I was able to get a lot more done. And it was actually way more productive. Sure. This is one example where burnout can really mess with your productivity, and sleep and rest can actually be more productive.
Right. And how do you discern when it's too much? Like, I understand for each person that amount varies greatly. For you, how do you decide, okay, now maybe it's too much?
It's a really good question, and I don't have a clear formula for this, but I like to block my weekends so that I'm never working on the weekends, even when things start to kind of poke at me. And part of me is like, let me just dive in and get this done, and I'll be having a head start for the next week. Well, it turns out the next week I have lower energy, so I'm less productive. So it almost ends up being a wash. So, weekends, like really protecting the weekends is a big thing. And then just being attuned with that self-care practice. Having more awareness of your energy levels is a core foundation of that routine, so that I'm not pushing too hard. I'm not going to too many events. I'm taking the time off to do nothing. My weekends are like, I want nothing scheduled. I want nothing planned. I get back into a state of creativity and a state of flow, and that sparks so many amazing ideas. So it's so powerful, but yet it is a hard thing to really put into practice, given the volume of tasks and the challenges that we take on.
Yeah, touching on a few other topics around entrepreneurship. I know that you are part of a few organizations that have, like, entrepreneurial organizations, sharing your experience with others on similar journeys. How has that been for you? Has it been helpful? And if it is, in what way?
Definitely has. I'm part of a CEO forum, a founder forum. 8 of us get together once a month for 4 hours. And we share the challenges in our business, and we share our own personal experiences that relate to other people's challenges. It's called an experience share. So we're not giving advice to them, we're sharing, and then they can take whatever advice they think from those experience shares. It's been extremely valuable just to hear the similar things that other people have gone through. As entrepreneurs, it can be very lonely. And one of the values of this type of forum is that you can say whatever you want in a space of non-judgment. You can say, my business is falling apart, I feel horrible, I'm doubting myself. These are not things you can say to your team, right? These are not things you can necessarily say to your significant other. I mean, hopefully you can, but maybe they can't really relate. So there's a group of people that can relate, they can share their experiences, and just that alone is so comforting. And it just happens to me. I did a deep dive share on a topic, And 3 people were like, yeah, I went through that twice already. And it just made me realize, okay, this is the path. So when we encounter these painful challenges, sometimes we doubt whether we're doing the right thing. And sometimes maybe we're not doing the right thing. And that's good information to change and pivot. On the other hand, when we know that other people went through the same thing, came out on the other side, then that helps us to have the courage and the comfort to just keep moving forward. The other thing on some of these support systems, so the CEO Forum is one that's been great for me. Another one is a community of entrepreneurs called Miami Made. And what I love about Miami Made is that they tend to have a give first sort of mentality. And what I love about that is, as entrepreneurs, we need help. So in order to allow us to really freely receive the help that we're seeking, I find it's helpful to help others. I don't know if there's some energetic resonance to this, or maybe it's a universal law of giving and receiving. I've heard that mentioned, and that does seem to resonate with me. So when I'm looking for help with something, I think, well, who can I help? Who do I know that's maybe not as far along as me that I can lend 30 minutes of my time to with no conditions attached, just for the purpose of helping? It also feels really good. It can be energizing. People are very appreciative. So this type of a community where you're really giving and seeking to help others has been very supportive.
Yeah. One other topic that I wanted to touch on is entrepreneurship, conscious entrepreneurship. I see you being very much involved in entrepreneurial circles, but also in spiritual circles. And I would say it's somewhat unique. I mean, yes, there are other people on a similar path, but I feel like it's not as common. You would find 2 separate camps there. Why do you think for you it's interesting, like you find value in being both, or you find the need to be in both? Talk about that, and then maybe we can also, I see a great value in kind of infusing the whole entrepreneurial community with the notion of spirituality, deep human connection, authenticity, all of those things. How can we do that for greater community? You know, since you're already doing it yourself, what's missing?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and I would like to just start by defining the spiritual community, the conscious community, what it means to me. It's all about personal development. And that's how I came into it. 3 years ago, I was experiencing another mental health challenge related to depression. And I decided to stop drinking alcohol completely, make a lot of life changes. And that led me to want to do more reading on some of the bigger questions that I was asking in my life. What is the purpose of this? What is the purpose of life, right? Why am I here? And that led me to then discovering certain communities where people are asking those questions and they're getting a lot of value from doing so and from sharing what they're finding with others. I went on some really long meditation retreats, met some amazing people there. And then I discovered that in Miami, there's this great community of people that are conscious. They're more intentional. They're more mindful in their living, which means they're doing meditation regularly. They're eating very healthy. They're exercising regularly. They're very conscious in their relationships. They're intending to show up in a very positive manner for themselves and for the world. They tend to want to make a positive impact and make a difference in people's lives. And that just made sense to me as a natural progression of my own personal development. And I'd always wanted to find a way to give back to the world. That's why I became an entrepreneur in the first place. And my Cuba company was very much a socially conscious model, working with the entrepreneurs and not with the government of that country. And so the spiritual community, the conscious community, I think speaks to a universal spirituality. It's not religious in any way. And that's clear for the people that are in it. But just to clarify for anyone that's watching or listening, that's what it means to me. And I'm in the field of personal development, mental health, and wellness. So spirituality in this universal sense is really, well, I should say mental health is a gateway to spiritual awareness. And there's even studies on this, and there's a very well-known mental health program, which is AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, which says is one of their steps that you need to take a belief in something greater than yourself. It doesn't have to be anything religious. It could be anything. It could be the concept of love. It could be your family. It could be your community. It could be anything. So that, and then also a recent study out of the Harvard School of Public Health showed that people that have spiritual beliefs actually have better health outcomes. So believing in something greater can actually improve your physical health and your mental health. And there are new centers that are popping up. There's one at Yale University that's going to be launching a mental health and spirituality center to study this in more depth. And so there's such a clear connection for me in my personal interest, in my business interest, to be experiencing these conscious states, spiritual states. I've also done a lot of meditation. Mindfulness can allow you to experience these elevated states. And I've also had experiences with plant medicines, also referred to as psychedelics, to understand how they fit into the alternative mental health therapy space for my own mental healing, my own process. And these are all related to this concept of spiritual awareness, energetic awareness, consciousness. So then we come back to the entrepreneurial world. I think most entrepreneurs are doing it because they want to help. They want to create a solution to a need. They want to solve some problem, some pain point that people have. So entrepreneurs are naturally already predisposed to wanting to be of service, to wanting to give back to the world in the same way that the spiritual community is. And I would love to see more connection between the two, because I think that as mental health is the gateway between both, and as I was saying earlier, for entrepreneurs, mental health is the most important thing. How can we create that foundation, that support system for ourselves? So going into some of these questions around the bigger reason why we're here, which come up as an entrepreneur. Why am I doing this, right? There's a lot of self-reflection. Why am I putting myself through all these challenges, right? And so I think to your point, there's such a natural bridge between these two areas and these two communities. And then lastly, I would love to see entrepreneurs that are taking care of themselves so that their creations will be a reflection of the greatest good that they're able to create internally. And this is kind of drawing on one of the spiritual concepts of this is a reflection. What I'm creating is a reflection of my inner state. And I would encourage all entrepreneurs to do that inner work so that the products that they're creating are of a higher quality for the world.
Yeah. What are the prerequisites for being an entrepreneur? And what's your definition of an entrepreneur?
Well, someone who's extremely passionate about something, that is very dedicated to it, very motivated, very persistent, tenacious, resourceful, smart, good network, gets along well with people.
Opportunistic, maybe.
Definitely.
Right. Yeah, visionary, somebody who, it has to be a manifester, somebody who knows how to convert a concept or an idea into, or at least a good entrepreneur would. I don't know if that's a prerequisite for being an entrepreneur.
I think so. Certainly on the visionary quality. You're seeing something other people can't see yet.
Right.
You're tackling the impossible problems that may be too hard for someone else to see a solution. And you're seeing it, right? You're seeing it somewhere. So that definitely relates to manifesting. You have a vision.
For sure.
You're feeling like it's already here. You're calling those events, circumstances, and people and resources to you to create whatever that product is.
Yeah, there's a quality of like a magician who would somehow like have this vision. There's no clear way how to put two together to create something, but the entrepreneurs are the ones who figure out a way how to like convert an idea, a novel idea, into a manifested experience or product or service or something like that.
For sure.
Yeah. So mental health is a big theme through your personal experience, and I want to kind of dive deeper into it from the perspective of there are few paths going kind of into the future. One where we maybe keep improving and painting that type of vision. What are we working towards? Like, what is the desirable future in which, let's say, we resolve this, it's not a problem anymore? And another distinct outcome. It's kind of the opposite. If things gonna just keep continuing getting worse, which in fact, if you look at some data, you would notice that this whole mental issue has been rising in the Western world, and so the probability of it are also pretty high if we don't do anything about it. I mean, there are a lot of smart people like yourself and others working on addressing those issues, but maybe let's talk about those two big scenarios and how do you think about them?
Yeah. Well, it's a growing crisis. There's no doubt.
Yeah.
50 million people have depression in the U.S. This is adults. 50 million adults, 40 million have anxiety, and 10 million have PTSD. These numbers are going up. Teenage mental health is a huge problem. About 50% of teenagers have depressive symptoms. This has been caused by the social media generation. You see a big spike in these numbers starting basically in 2010. And then COVID hit, and that made their development a lot more challenging. And then you have veterans. Their mental health is still suffering. Suicide rates are going up. So it's imperative it's imperative that we have a new solution, because the solutions we have currently are not working well enough to keep up with these issues. And I've been very heartened and very encouraged to see mental health innovation coming out of great universities. I was at a mental health conference at Stanford a couple months ago, and they were sharing new research that shows that severe mental illness can actually be cured with dietary changes. This is schizophrenia and bipolar disorder specifically. May be able to be changed, may be able to be cured with dietary changes and supplements. So that type of potential, that type of research is happening in the right places. And I'm very encouraged by that. We are another innovative technology that can really help with this issue in a scalable way. And so as I think about that path, that first scenario to a future state where mental health is a thing, mental health issues are a thing of the past, right? And we look back and we say, wow, I can't believe 50 million US adults were depressed. That's a huge number, right? I can't believe all these teenagers were depressed. And what I believe, the way that we're going to get there is by letting people know, by teaching them that they can change their brains, which is what we do. So we teach people how to use neuroplasticity to change their brains. We're creating new neural pathways all the time, including in this conversation right now. We're just applying that concept, continuous neuroplasticity, to intentionally change our brains, to get rid of depression, to get rid of anxiety, to get rid of PTSD. So there's an education piece, and there's a big empowerment piece to this to help us stay on that first path. And that's just also connected to my own personal mission, greater empowerment of individuals to understand they don't need these other things for their mental health. They can actually change their own brains. It takes work, it takes time and energy and effort. We have technology that facilitates that process. But I think that's the key, is greater education, greater awareness. I would also add less stigma, de-stigmatization of mental health. Yep. It's happened. That's already happened quite a bit since COVID. There's been a lot of destigmatization. We've heard from top athletes, from top artists, that they're sharing vulnerably their mental health challenges. I like to do the same. I personally have struggled with anxiety. I've struggled with depression. I tell that to my team. I tell that to my friends. I tell it to my family members. I want to encourage people to do the same. So destigmatizing, better leadership from our leaders to be open about what they're experiencing, to make it okay for their teams to do the same. And greater awareness from the public, from the government, from investors, philanthropists, entrepreneurs, the whole ecosystem of how important this issue is. It's primary to the success of our entire civilization, of the entire human race. Mental health is the core issue. Sure. And if we're able to heal, there are so many other secondary issues that can be solved as a result of that. If you just think about other challenges that we face in the world today. So I'm really emphasizing and encouraging anyone listening, help us on this mission. Keep us on this first path so that we avoid The second scenario, which is one in which the technology, the solutions, and I use tech for good in this scenario, the tech for good, the new solutions can't quite keep up with the pace of the let's say counter attention grabbing things, right? The news, the media, the division in our society, the other aspects that are growing, that are causing these trends to rise. So countering, how can we tip the scale so that we're keeping on the right path? And I think in that second scenario, that's where you just have too much consumption of these divisive pieces of media that have become so ingrained into our society and are really just creating more and more stress. And that's just one piece of kind of what one of the problems is today.
You know, you mentioned technology can't keep up with the development of this bigger problem. You know, I think technology is feeding into the problem and maybe causing it, actually. And I see a big component of the reason why we've gotten here, why we're here, is because of the speeding up of information flow and overload of information. When the life is very slow, there's less anxiety, less stress, and the faster you go, and technology tends to speed things up just because in the tech world, in the, like a digital domain, there are no laws like friction, gravity, time runs not in seconds, but millions of things could happen in 1 second. For human mind, we perceive things in real time, basically, right? And so when the technology is spilling out more and more into the physical reality, it's affecting humans in a negative way. So I think we have to be very conscious of how we use our tools, and not make the tools kind of affect us in the way, basically in the way that's undesirable. Speed of navigating life, I think, is a big component so being really aware of slowing down, taking a breath. That's why like meditation is so big. Breath work, all of those practices are all centered around how do we slow down, and
I think nature is also a key factor there. And what's great about this problem is that we already have the solution. Just turn our phones off.
Yes.
It's just pretty hard to do sometimes.
Right.
But
yeah, I agree that that's certainly a solution. We are battling the evolutionary process in that solution, though, because the evolutionary process wants to complexify things and want to grow and want to expand and want to create more novelty in the world. And as that process evolves, humans just have to adapt to more novelty in a certain amount of time. So if you look at the evolutionary process, billions of years ago, when there was no life, at least what we know of, there were just like star systems and things were just happening extremely, extremely slow. Like one thing to another would be like millions of years. And as the time progressed through the evolutionary process, things would take less and less and less time. And we're still on that curve. And it's an exponential one, right? And maybe we're basically kind of put against the wall of this evolutionary process that the biological vehicle that we navigate life is its capacity, maybe.
It's a really interesting segue to talk a little bit more about our theories on the biological vehicle and specifically the nervous system. So to kind of create the context around this, we're talking about being overloaded in society, that technology is rapidly moving forward. There are all these new tools. We're being inundated with things. Media consumption is going from, let's say, 30-minute segments to 7-second segments. Yep. And there's no shortage of them. They're coming at us all the time. So it's really grabbing our attention, which may be our most valuable currency. What are we paying attention to? And sometimes it's hard not to pay attention to it because it's everywhere and it's all around us when it comes to social media and the news and other things, emails, right? Relates to work, professional environment. So all of this stimulation is affecting us. It's affecting our biological vehicle, our bodies, right? And it's affecting our nervous system. And our nervous system is the part of our body through which we experience life. It's in our brain and it runs throughout our entire body. So what we've discovered is that we can change our nervous system intentionally. We don't need to rely on these external forces. We don't need to, that we can actually take the power back and be empowered to change our inner state, change our nervous system. So what we've seen is that many people have an excessive amount of energy in certain parts of their nervous system that correspond with the fight or flight response. And that can be a byproduct of all this overload, that it creates some sense of danger at a very fundamental subconscious level that's not necessary anymore because we're actually not in danger. But it's perceived as a psychological threat. And that could be a scary news headline, or it could be an email from your boss. In either case, there's no part of your system that's required to activate all that fight, flight energy in those moments. The problem is those moments are being stacked continuously and people aren't getting a break. And that's where it becomes chronic hypervigilance that's no longer serving humanity. So we say it's time to upgrade your hardware and change your nervous system to exist in this new age of rapidly developing technology. We need the humans to develop as well to be able to utilize these tools to our greatest advantage. So we use technology for good by helping people train their brainwaves, which are part of the nervous system, and rebalance the amount of energy that's in that fight-flight response and allocate it to other parts of their brain and nervous system that are a lot more enjoyable. For example, the alpha brainwaves. You hear about monks meditating. They can put themselves into a state of alpha. Alpha is associated with happiness, stability. It feels amazing. So we teach how to consciously change your experience of life through rewiring, reprogramming your brain, your mind, and your nervous system to insulate from all this inundation of the short attention span, media clips, however we want to call that, emails.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's almost feels like the process of like speeding up and oversaturating our mind with information is maybe a natural process for us to become more and more aware of different levels of our own being, the neurosystem, different frequencies, and really go further, deeper down into all aspects of ourselves to be able to fine-tune them, control them, and improve them, and optimize them for. But I feel like this also, it could be kind of a slippery slope in the optimization journey, right? Like, let's just optimize the heck out of everything. And it might be a dead end there. I don't know.
Well, it's funny because in the optimization paradigm, it does have a sense of urgency and even like some fight or flight fear underlying the word optimization. Why am I optimizing? Is something wrong with me?
Right.
I need to, so the way we optimize is for presence, calm, joy, happiness in life.
Right.
So when I hear optimize, it almost feels like, okay, we're fine tuning stuff to infinity, right? And then that doesn't feel like the right answer for peace and inner peace. So our optimization is helping people to achieve that state of inner peace and happiness by default, which we happen to believe is optimal for human beings. And it just so happens when you do that, all those resources that we didn't even know we're throwing away at this fight-flight thing because it's subconscious, we now have those resources to enjoy our life. That's the peace and happiness part, but also to still do work and be productive. And we're actually better at that because we're not in chronic stress. So we're capable of being a lot more creative and actually moving faster and being more evolved and creating better.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, back to the evolution, by the way, I'm like a big fan of the whole evolutionary theory, like how it's all on every scale, at every scale of life. I'm always fascinated by the progression of the process of progression. And so optimization, I think it's a good optimization problem if we're optimizing for higher consciousness. Like, what can we do to incrementally increase? Because I think we are right on the same line with evolution. And we're not fighting it. So let's say if we say, oh, let's just go back in time, let's make things a lot simpler, let's just live in the forest, primitive life. I think you're going against the evolutionary process, and I don't think that's the right approach. I think it's good to root yourself in the practices that served humanity for thousands of years, so that we can learn from them and understand what works. But we shouldn't just say this path forward where things complexify in themselves is the wrong one. Let's just go back in time. Because I've certainly had those conversations with a lot of people, and they say, yeah, less technology, less optimization. Let's just go back to primitive life.
The only way out is through.
Exactly.
We only have one system. Let's make it better. Well, we have many systems, but there's one society that we're talking about here. Let's make it better.
Yeah.
Let's not run away from it. That seems like it'd be harder to me. And to your point, we're then kind of maybe moving backwards. We've got a lot of good stuff in our society. There's amazing tools that can help us live our lives and solve some of the biggest problems.
Exactly.
So totally with you. And I think referring to consciousness as a guiding principle here makes sense to me. So this is soul evolution, right? This is our personal development.
Yep.
And if we're growing and we're expanding and we're increasing our consciousness, then we're going to have more tools available to us internally for the things that we're talking about, inner peace, happiness, and we'll be better equipped to help fix some of these issues that we're talking about from a grassroots level. This is where I love to come back to empowering individuals. Each of us has such a imprint on the world, in our families, in our communities, in our jobs. So it just takes us as individuals working on ourselves to have that ripple effect. And mental health being the gateway to consciousness. Consciousness has a spiritual awareness feeling to it, but what does it really mean? Right? It means healing some of the traumas and things that hold us back related to depression, anxiety, and PTSD. Okay, we took care of those things. What's next? And that's something that comes up for people in the Supermind journey. I don't have depression anymore. I still want to improve myself. Okay, now I'm thinking about how I can live in these elevated states of consciousness, how I can go into deep mindfulness exercises and feel bliss and feel ecstatic joy just for breathing. They're all really enjoyable. There's no reason why that can't coexist with having an amazing job. So I love also what you said about bringing back some of the ancient practices, things that have worked for thousands of years. East meets West. And one way that tech for good can be used is we now have way more information about these practices in the Western world than we ever have through YouTube, webinars, books. So certainly there's a lot of things that we can be happy and excited about. And I love bringing consciousness into the conversation because I think it's a great guiding principle.
For sure. Yeah, I think it's a good place for us to dive a little bit deeper into Supermind, maybe starting from posing the problem that's there. I mean, we've talked about the problem, but maybe telling like a cohesive story, posing the problem and type of the solution that you guys are solving, and then the vision that you have for the future. That could be the...
Absolutely. So the problem is people have mental health issues, depression, anxiety, and PTSD we've talked about. And the existing solutions are not keeping up with the pace of these issues. The primary solutions currently are therapy and medication. Therapy is tough. It works really well if you find a good therapist, but it's hard to find a good therapist. It may take 3 or 4 times before you get someone that you like. Often people give up during that process. Many therapists don't take insurance, and the best ones can be on 6, 9, or 12-month wait lists. So if you have a problem today, it's hard to find someone. Then on the medication side, it's kind of just treating symptoms. And nobody wants to be on medication for the rest of their life. It's also a one-size-fits-all trial and error process. Try this pill for a month. How do you feel? Try that pill for a month. It's not comfortable if you're the person going through that trial period. So the tools that we have helped people, but they're not helping enough in this new era that we're in, the pace of technology and the other challenges. And so we have a new way of addressing mental health, and that's by using data and standardization. So the data piece is we have a whole new lens of how we look at mental health based on brainwave data. This is an objective measurement that has been the holy grail for the field of psychology and psychiatry for years, to be able to objectively, with biological data, measure someone's mental health. We have some very exciting theories on how to do this, which are going to take years to validate scientifically. But we use that as a starting point, and then we personalize the treatment plans based on what's happening in your brainwaves. So if your brainwaves are showing this during session 2, exercise 3, in your occipital lobe, your delta frequency, then that there's something related to an issue of identity, and we provide a prompt to the practitioner to review that concept before you move forward. So the data component is extremely valuable to the personalization of the treatment.
Right.
The second piece is the standardization. So we've created a standardized program that is effective for multiple indications, which to us indicates that we're really hitting on root causes of mental illness, whether it's depression or anxiety or PTSD, with fairly minimal changes. And one reason why we've seen this standardization be so effective is because we're able to access the deeper levels of the mind, brain, and nervous system, referred to as the subconscious. The subconscious is something we can now measure with this data. It's the delta frequency, the theta frequency brainwaves, and we can show people measurable results of how they've changed. This part of our brain is 75% of our brain energy. So when we're just doing therapy, we're only hitting on the tip of the iceberg. We're not getting to any of the stuff underneath the surface, which is why people are in therapy for 10 years and they come to us, and within 10 days, they're able to have a life-changing transformation. Or they're on meds for 10 years and within 10 days, they're able to have a life-changing transformation with us. So it's a very powerful new modality that's combining the ancient practices. We have mindfulness as a part of this, deep breathing exercises, and then we're bringing in state-of-the-art brainwave technology to accelerate the pace of change, teaching people how to use their own neuroplasticity to change their brains, and then measure the results in a whole new way using the brainwave data.
Yeah, walk me through the actual way you guys do it. So you have, I mean, I've experienced it a few years ago. I'm sure it evolved quite a bit since then. So you wearing a cap, right, with nodes that are measuring your brainwave activity in different parts of the brain. You digitize the signal. You also have your headphones as a feedback mechanism, right? It's in real time feeding you something based on what it's reading from your. So walk me through how exactly that works.
Absolutely. So we use sound to help guide the brainwaves. And that sound is personalized in real time based on what your brainwaves are doing in that moment. We have sensors that we place on the head, either through a cap, or if you're in the center, we're using wired sensors at the moment. And so those sounds are played through a pair of headphones. They're very calming, they're very relaxing, and they're actually guiding your brainwaves to be even more calm and more relaxed than what we could do on our own through the principle of biofeedback. And you can think of this as a mirror of your brain. We don't really know what's going on in our brains. But by correlating a signal that we can perceive with our senses, sound, with something that's happening in our brain, we're able to gain awareness of what's happening in our brain. And then with that awareness, we can change it a lot faster than we could do without that type of feedback. So that's how the feedback component works. Now, while we're doing that feedback and you're listening to the music of your mind, which is very calming, we're also guiding people through mindfulness practices. We've paired the biofeedback with the mindfulness at the same time, which is very unique. We haven't found anyone else that's doing it that way. So you're being guided to enter into a deep, relaxing state, visualizing certain specific things that you might want in your life. For example, having a really good night's sleep. we can actually program our sleep. We can self-direct our sleep to be much better than we realize just by telling ourselves it's time to go to sleep. We have a mantra around it, we have breathing exercise, and we have a visualization where you start to program your sleep in a whole new way. So that's an example of a mindfulness technique that we pair with the feedback. And all of this is part of a very comprehensive, standardized curriculum that teaches people, one, what is neuroplasticity? We can change our brains. Okay, great. Now what do we do now that we know we can change our brain? What's next? Okay, the next step is learn how to calm yourself down. Learn how to respond and not to react. So we have these building blocks that we build upon. Part of that is understanding our beliefs. What do we believe about ourselves? What do we believe about our identities, about our self-worth? And we combine these concepts that people learn with the brainwave therapy and the mindfulness and the biofeedback, all into one integrated modality that is healing both the mind and the body through the brain and the nervous system being a part of the body. And that's why we've seen it be so effective compared to other modalities. Our latest data shows that 90% of people experience clinically meaningful improvement. So our efficacy is 90%. This works for 90% of people, which is very high for mental health. Right. Therapy meds are going to be more like 50%. And the average person from that 90% is improving 50%, which is a life-changing improvement for someone with depression, anxiety, or PTSD to improve 50% on whatever their challenge may be.
Yeah. Have you guys at all explored pairing your modality with something like psychedelics or microdosing or something like that? I don't know if that's something.
We've thought about it.
Yeah.
And certain compounds, such as psilocybin, would probably increase neuroplasticity. Yeah. And that could actually improve our efficacy. But we've decided not to go down that path right now because it just complicates things a little bit too much given the regulatory challenges in that space.
Yeah. Yeah, I would imagine down the line that's something, it's like one multiplying the other. One is effective on its own, the other one is effective on its own. And putting two together and figuring out how to make them work, because I'm sure there might be some areas of overlap that are not desirable maybe. But a big chunk of it is probably like very desirable and very useful, interesting. You know what was also interesting when I experienced it, when they were able to tell me that certain part of my childhood and particular age range that would potentially something that must have happened. So it's interesting that you could see that through doing this biofeedback. How does that work?
It's fascinating. And this is how I was drawn into the business initially as a client. I was experiencing severe anxiety. I met my co-founder who created this technology. And the first step of the process is a mind map. So people come in for the mind map. We look at their brain waves and we tell them our interpretation, our hypotheses of what these brain waves mean. Many people that come in are blown away that this is even possible because it tends to be pretty or very accurate. And in my case, it was extremely accurate. It sounds like in your case, it may have been accurate as well. So the way we can see these different events or life patterns is through these subconscious brainwaves. It's almost like rings on a tree. If you think of like a tree, you cut off the top, there's these rings in the stump. Each one is corresponding to a year of the tree's life. And that's always there. So similarly, there's an imprint in our subconscious brainwaves. When we were infants and developing as kids, these parts of our brain were absorbing experiences and lessons that are still there, right? As the more conscious parts of the brain start to form around those subconscious areas. So we can actually look back and see this life pattern of what happened from 0 to 7, 7 to 25 years old, and then after 25 with pretty remarkable resonance and accuracy for the people that come in. And I just want to say, to scientifically validate this piece of our product will take years, and it's not something we're focused on yet because our efficacy is so high. We don't need to try to map the mind, which is kind of what we're talking about. But we're using the knowledge that there's clearly a correlation here. That's all we need to know. There is a correlation between our brainwaves and our mental health. And with that knowledge, we've then designed the entire personalization process. And we're still collecting all this data to be fed into machine learning and AI to help us create that mind map over time.
That whole topic, I think, is super fascinating to be able to untangle all of the complexity of the brain function and our frequencies and all of that to accurately pinpoint each element and say this here and this there and this is how you tweak that one. It's crazy that because we'll get there, I'm sure. What do you think?
I think we will get there. I also believe there will be challenges to a universal mapping because all of our experiences are by definition subjective. So someone with one set of brainwaves that's identical to another might experience them differently.
Yeah.
And to solve for that variable, there's another layer of data that we would need to incorporate.
For sure.
So it may not be possible to universally map the mind with 100% accuracy. We may be able to do it with 90% accuracy, 95% accuracy. There may be 2 or 3 or 4 other layers that, okay, we've got this profile with 97% accuracy. Now to get to 100, then we got to ask these other 3 things, and then we're able to specifically tell you exactly what it means. But they're undoubtedly a huge key to understanding ourselves as human beings. This is data that is basically describing how we're experiencing life. So a huge key to understanding ourselves and to improving, healing ourselves, unlocking the supermind within each of us. Yeah,
that's fascinating. I think it might be like a diminishing return on like the entanglement and the depending on what person that is to go from 90 to 100, that might be just harder and harder and harder. I'm sure you've seen the studies now where they're able to convert brainwave signal into the imagery. So a person would be looking at an image and they would interpret the brainwave signal into fuzzy, similar looking image. I feel like we're getting to the point where we'll be accurately able to read people's minds. Like we'll be able to read their dreams and their thoughts, which is a crazy thing to think about.
That might be on the second path, the scary future.
Yeah.
I don't know. But what I like to envision is a non-invasive solution. So the implantable chips, that to me is a little bit too, let's say, risky for the future. I wouldn't want anything implanted into my brain, at least now. I'm sticking to it.
For sure.
So what I like about our program is it's teaching people how to have agency over themselves. It's not doing anything to you. And so even if we have information about some of these patterns, that it can only help you to learn more about yourself, to improve yourself. In terms of being able to read the mind and kind of, people's dreams and those types of things, there's also a hardware challenge to this that's very significant. So to have a miniaturized, consumer-friendly price point of something that could actually do that, whether it's a chip or whether it's a sensor, is still years away, even if the computing models can do it. Right? The AI is smart enough already to do some pretty incredible stuff. But what hardware they're using, right? They probably have huge rooms of servers to be able to do that on a mass democratized scale.
Of course.
Is still far off in the future.
Yeah, I mean, the mass scale of it certainly will take some time, but even to think about, I'm fairly optimistic about any types of developments. Certainly we have to be cautious and careful how we use new tools, new technologies, like the implanting of a chip in your brain. There's so many ways how it could go wrong, 100%. And there are a lot of people who are thinking about those problems. I tend to focus on topics that are very optimistic and exciting. Again, I totally understand that we definitely have to take care of the other, bunch of questions that needs to be answered before we even go that deep into developing those solutions. But I am excited about the future where you are able to take a friend or your partner on a ride into your mind, and you can show them your dreams. You can show them the limitless like ocean of your creativity, and show them your world basically. I think it would be kind of cool to, and not just like peek in, but truly experience the world that you both of you can embody basically.
That sounds like a very exciting use case. Yeah, to facilitate human connection and really get to know the other person at a very deep level.
Right. But yeah, there are definitely so many unknowns before we go there, and I feel like maybe the future is not where we are physically implanting something, but we're able to so precisely at a distance read the minute changes in electric signal in your brain. I mean, thinking about now they're launching a satellite in space that's able to serve cellular network connection. I mean, it's a similar scale. Mm-hmm. Like the Earth is so large and the humans are tiny compared like how far away from the satellite, but it's now able to like pick up the minute frequencies on the Earth. It's similar. I mean, I feel like it's a similar problem now, where they're minute, tiniest signals that each neuron is producing. And if you're able to like map it all out or like read each one of them, you're able to understand what's happening inside of it. And we're probably really long time away from that, but I don't see how that's completely impossible.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And we've seen some developments in that direction at conferences, people talking about those types of capabilities. Reading brainwaves from a distance, for example, reading brainwaves off of a wristband. That would be another great development to democratize this, where you just use your Apple Watch and you're getting biofeedback from your Apple Watch on your brain.
Yeah.
You had asked earlier about our vision for the future.
Yes.
And I think it's a very bright one. And to me, it comes back to empowerment and sense of agency. It doesn't take that much for someone to learn they can change. They can change their brain, they can change their brainwaves, they can use neuroplasticity in a way that serves them in their life. So our vision is that we teach people how to do that on a grand scale and quiet this fight or flight response, the survival instincts that are no longer serving us, and shift that awareness, that energy, that focus out of the hypervigilance, out of the fight flight, out of the stress, and into states of peace, happiness, greater productivity, greater focus. So we have a very clear understanding of what the problem is at a biological level in the nervous system. We see the proportions of brainwaves. And we have a tool, we have a technique and a program that can help to make that shift on a wide scale. So we're very optimistic about what that means for the future of mental health, for those that are suffering from some of these issues. And we'll just invite people to stay tuned to our story, to our progress over time. We're starting our first scientific studies this year, and we'll be building an at-home version of our product that will be accessible for millions of people.
What would they be able to do with that product? A future version, maybe not the one that you currently projecting to work on, but what's the furthest vision that you guys ever talked about?
Well, I think the wristband is probably the furthest vision, although we haven't seen enough to really make that concrete in any way yet. And that would be wearing a wristband and you're able to do the brain training that we're doing with 22 sensors currently.
22 sensors on the brain?
22 sensors on the brain is what it takes currently. We could do all of that with just one sensor on the wrist. One step before that would be offering our product for $50 a month, no upfront cost. And you're getting a very appealing consumer version of the product that you can use every single day, starting with some of the healing stuff we talked about, and then moving into some of the optimizations. How do I want to live my life? What do I want to improve? And there is no limit to how much we can improve ourselves. And having this type of a technology that can measure your progress and accelerate your ability to improve has so much potential. So our ultimate goal is to bring this into everyone's home at a very affordable price point so that everyone has access to it.
Amazing. Yeah. Have you guys Is there such thing as overdoing this biofeedback loop? Let's say you're running it, let's say 12 hours a day, and are there negative externalities of overusing it or using it or something like that? Have you guys discovered any of them?
Well, we haven't had anyone use it for that long, and it does get pretty tiring if you do 2 sessions a day, which would be about 4 hours of training. And so I wouldn't be too worried about that happening, but certainly you could overdo it. There's no doubt. This is still looking at a screen. If you're looking at your computer for 12 hours a day, that's going to have some negative effects over time. And I do want to also empower people to get off of the technology, that they're not dependent on it in any way. And that would be built into our core values as well. So we talked about nature a little bit, shifting away from the tech component into a more natural state of mindfulness as an example. And so I think that's an important part of it.
So you guys are doing, so another idea that I just had, have you thought about, instead of using just the sound, using the visual stimulation of some sort that would also do some kind of mimicry of the brainwaves? And I understand maybe you guys are not there, there's so many other things to worry about, but was that even a consideration?
It is, and we are using sound as a feedback modality. The only thing that we're using visual as a feedback modality. The only thing that sound can do that visual cannot do is it can provide feedback with your eyes closed, which is very important. So the 2 states we experience the world, eyes open, eyes closed. We're training about 80% of our exercises eyes closed, and you can't really do much with that with visual cues. There's a lot you can do with visual cues with the eyes open exercises.
Yeah, I wonder if that's because, most of our input is visual, and I understand that our brain might go into a very different state when we close our eyes. Naturally, it just goes to a different phase of operating. Yeah, I feel like it's still not very much discovered field of what can we show visually to our brain that makes it calming and makes it more and it might not be a recognizable object, but it might be just some kind of pattern that your brain just interprets in some.
And there are some really cool VR applications that do that, where you're being shown a beautiful scene in nature, and that can have a calming effect.
Something that's familiar, yeah. Cool, man. Yeah, so let's see. Let me know if there's anything else that you think would be useful to mention in this framework. Maybe if nothing else, then maybe talk about where can people find you and to read more about what you guys are up to.
Yeah. So for anyone that's experiencing depression, anxiety, PTSD, that's looking for help, come find us. Our website is supermind.us. And we're also on social media, supermind.us. We would love to help. And they can also find me on my personal social, which is Chad_Olin, OLIN. Would love to hear from you. And if you're interested in any of the other topics that we talked about, please do reach out. It's really a personal interest of mine just to talk about the entrepreneurial journey, to talk about mindfulness, wellness, mental health routines, the conscious community, the spiritual awareness piece of this, how it ties to entrepreneurship, our vision for the future. And I would just encourage people to stay positive, stay optimistic, understand as part of this neuroplasticity thing that we have agency to do that. We can choose to think more positively. We can choose to take moments to feel more gratitude. We can choose to take a moment to connect with a loved one. We have the power to do all of those things, and even the little things can really go a long way. So I'm focusing on that first path that we talked about as our future, as a society, as a planet, as a civilization. And if that resonates, I would love to jam more on any of that with you.
Beautiful. Thank you, brother, for being here. And this is the first maybe of many conversations in this format. Once you have some more updates on maybe some findings, some other things that we can chat about, we'll be glad to invite you again.
Kirill, really appreciate you inviting me on. This is such an amazing format. I really appreciate everything that you're doing. Thank you. And would love to come back on the next time.
Some other time. Awesome. Thank you, man.